All right, so first of all, welcome everyone to this final panel discussion of this year's Vienna Migration Conference on the next 5 years dealing with black swans and staying the course. We'll have the chance to recap the highlights of this year's conference and also, to use a term from Ivan Krastev, do some serious fortune telling on what lies ahead in the next 5 years. So I think looking back, we can sort of categorize broadly the events of the past 5 years into 3 points. One, we can say we've certainly been blindsided over the past 5 years by key events that then ended up shaping our world and with it migration. But second, there were also quite a few events that we knew would be relevant, pressing migration issues that we could prepare for and deal with over the 5-year period. And then third, there were events that came disguised as a surprise, but in the end, I think we could have seen coming and maybe also prepare for better if we consider the geopolitical and economic context in which they emerged. What the last 5 years have certainly reminded us of is that we need to have a broad perspective when it comes to analyzing what's currently at play and deliberating what lies ahead in the field of migration. The Vienna Migration Conference, as you all know very well, aims to deliver content for reflection, for these kind of reflections also on the next 5 years, by considering migration through different lenses and by taking different angles at the topic. Thus, I want to honor this conference and also the title of this discussion by discussing with my distinguished panel that I will introduce in a moment on what stood out during this conference and also what lies ahead for us in the next 5 years. So I'm delighted to be joined here on stage by, as mentioned, 3 distinguished panelists which bring different perspectives to this final reflection, which I think is crucial. And these different perspectives also come, of course, from the professional position they respectively hold. So starting from my left, I would like to welcome Sofia Walsh, who is the Knowledge Management Director at Fragomen's Brussels office. In the middle, Guy Stessens, Deputy Director responsible for Asylum, Migration, Visa and Borders at the Council of the European Union. And last but certainly not least, Hanne Beirens is the Director of the Migration Policy Institute Europe. My name is Sarah Schlaeger. As you probably know by now, I'll be moderating this session. Let's start. So over the last 1.5 days, I think we've touched upon many different topics, which I will not reiterate, but will instead turn to my panel and ask you about your conference highlights, but then also add, what do you think, which central topics should we look out for and prepare for in Europe as the new Commission takes up work? And I would like to start out with you, Guy, on your highlights, and then also what do you think the member states will be grappled with, and by extension, the Council in the next 5 years? Please. Okay, thank you very much. I would like maybe to start by what was said by Ivan Krastev in the first session, where he referred to the eminent political nature of the debate on migration and on asylum in general. It's something that, as a manager responsible for this area in the Council, one of the 2 co-legislators in the European Union, I'm of course acutely aware of, but I think Ivan reminded us in a very eloquent way. And one of the things that strikes me about that is that often, or at least sometimes, one notices that for political, ideological reasons, I have the impression that political actors want the wrong thing. Or they are opposed to something for presentational reasons. And I'll give 2 examples of that. One from the recent past, from the Pact, and one for the probably recent future. From the Pact, and it's an example that I have already given once in another context where Hanne was also present, is the border procedure, which is one of the main achievements of the Pact.
And during the negotiations with the Parliament was trying to oppose the fact that children or minors would be put into the border procedure. It was not accepted by the Council, and eventually there is no such total exclusion of minors from the border procedure. The reason for that is that it was unacceptable for member states for a number of reasons, including security reasons, but also that this would send completely the wrong signal and would basically, it would help migrant smugglers, because all they would have to do was to put minors on a boat to make sure that people would not would not be channeled into the border procedure. And it was with great difficulty that you have to try to convince MEPs that this is not the right way to go. But they are looking for things for the wrong reason, because they look at it from an ideological point of view, as do certain NGOs, I think. Another example, the other way around, is the debate that is now going to happen, but that we've already had 5 years ago, about giving Frontex a role in returning people from third countries. This was already part of the negotiations of the Frontex regulation in 2019. It was opposed by the European Parliament, but I actually think that the European Parliament is the one institution that should want this, because if Frontex is given a role, and I'm not saying it would be a bad thing, but if Frontex will be given a role, a formal role in effecting returns from third countries, that will in effect bring those return operations into the realm of EU law. It will bring them under the scrutiny of all kinds of EU institutions, including eventually the Court of Justice. So it's quite startling that, the Parliament is opposed to it. Again, it seems for presentational, ideological reasons. I mean, another consequence of the political nature of this debate is that we are now, and we have been discussing also yesterday, about solutions of externalizing the processing of asylum applications. We will obviously see in the future what proposals will be made and whether this will result in a change of legislation or not. But the debate again seems to be very much focused on certain presentational aspects, because as, for example, Chancellor Scholz has publicly stated, it is difficult to see how these solutions could bring a real impact in terms of numbers, because the numbers that, even if you put aside all the legal, the practical and other considerations, even if all that works in terms of numbers, it would have a small impact. A second point I wanted to make was that because of the political impact that we have, the political nature of this debate, the security aspect of migration is going to only increase in the future. One element of that is the increasing internal border controls that are introduced. Another example of that are instrumentalization. I'll come back to that in a moment, which is going to influence the debate in the future, I think, about migration. And a third example is something which was also mentioned, is the fact that the return of security of persons with security concerns is becoming higher on getting higher on the political agenda, and I think it's a case where the fact of returning certain persons is more important than the number of persons that one returns, and that, I think, is also an explanation as to why this is getting higher on the agenda. Another consequence of the political nature of this debate is that and someone from an NGO representative yesterday seemed to deplore the fact that ministries of interior were so present in this debate. This reminded me of a statement that was made by someone who used to work for the parliament and then made a very smooth transition to the NGO world, said at a conference that the ministries of interior were the Darth Vaders of the migration debate. But this will only increase in the future, of course. The whole security aspect will make that they will become more present and will be more dominating or will have a louder voice in this debate. Now, you also asked us to look at the future. And the title of this panel referred to black swans. In 2015, I was not dealing with migration, but I was reading a book, actually, which is The Black Swan, which is written by Nassim Taleb, who is the American-Lebanese author who coined this term. And he actually explains that most of the black swans you can't see coming. So it's a bit of a very challenging tasking that you gave us. But anyway, I will try to come up with a few replies. One, as you mentioned yourself, Sarah, I think one black swan, potential black swan, is of course geopolitics. We don't know what is going to happen geopolitically, but we may have surprises coming sooner than we think, maybe as soon as the 4th of November or the days after the 4th of November. I would just remind that a long time ago, in 1974, if I'm not mistaken, a country which later on became a member state of the European Union was invaded, and an invasion which has migration consequences up to this day, in the week that Richard Nixon left the White House. So we'll see what happens in the United States and what geopolitical consequences that may have elsewhere. Another future evolution that we may see is instrumentalization. Of course, we've already been witnessing this. We had a very interesting statement by the Polish State Secretary yesterday evening about that. But what we have not witnessed, luckily, in the European Union so far is large number instrumentalization of migrants, because I do not want to belittle the gravity of the situation that we've seen so far in some of our member states, but the number of migrants that have been pushed to the external border of the European Union have been, all in all, relatively limited. But we cannot exclude that in the future we would face a situation where we would not be talking about tens or hundreds of migrants, but that we would be talking about 10,000s of migrants. And this will change the paradigm then, and we will have a completely different debate about migration. Some of the concerns that have been voiced by the NGO world will seem petty as compared to what we will see then. I cannot predict what terms of solutions, or not solution, but how we would try to address, but I have difficulty in seeing that this would happen through the current legal framework. Maybe for the NGOs that deplored the presence of the ministries of interior in this debate, maybe the role of the ministries of interior will be taken over by those of the ministries of defense. Then I don't know whether that will make the NGOs happy, but it would not make me happy, but it's something which I cannot exclude. Maybe I should wrap up here.
No, but thank you so much. I think it would have been wonderful to continue listening to you yourselves, but I think, yeah, we have lunch waiting. It's always a bit of a challenging panel, I think. But thank you for the reality check, also very much on, between politics and impact, and then also to reminding us that black swans are seen much better from behind, and it's also afterwards that we can see the traces that they leave and maybe the mess that we have to clean up. But next I would like to come to you, Anna Sofia, and ask you what your main takeaways are from the conference, and what do you think will be key for the private sector in the field of migration in the next 5 years, please?
Sure, and firstly, thank you again for inviting me back. It's been a wonderful edition, and I think the scene was very aptly set by Ivan yesterday morning. I think I was looking and listening a lot to the vocabulary used over the last day and a half, and I would like to challenge a little bit the overuse of the word crisis and unprecedented times. Indeed, as Guy mentioned, we've discussed a lot of black swans and looking in the retrospective, but also looking to the future. And so we no longer can consider the black swans that we know of today within the realm of crisis. And we also need to use the unprecedented amount of data and technology to help us forecast better and to help us prepare better. And indeed, that's what we say to our businesses, is you need to stack the odds in your favor, knowing the information that you do now. And this, again, may be a perspective that policymakers and sometimes businesses have because we work in electoral cycles. And of course, this year was the year of elections, with half of the world's population going to the polls, and indeed many instrumental elections happening here in Europe. But we need to have a long-term perspective, and indeed this was bolstered by Larry Fink this week of BlackRock, saying, yes, there is the US election, but we're looking at our investments way past the next cyclical term. And indeed, if we see here in Europe at home, the migration formed part of a lot of political campaigns, and there was a lot of what we call performative hostility, of saying one thing about migration, but then once in power, perhaps doing something different. And here I'm talking more so about labor migration, because we have to be very realistic in terms of our demographic challenges and labor market shortages. And so we saw from our colleague at DG Home, who I think is here in the audience still, that there's still 60 to 80% of companies from all sizes that are facing labor market shortages. So we will see, I think, continuing in political and electoral campaigns, that the labor market impacts will have to be reduced to ensure that the business community can continue to be competitive. Another takeaway from the conference is the continued polarization between labor migration and non-labor migration. Indeed, I think the panelist from ECRI said that the EU is trying to ride two horses. And again, this is evident from the VMC schedule, where there was a clear division between non-labor migration conversations yesterday and a few panels this morning about labor migration. And while there is no silver bullets in trying to combine the two, there is an opportunity, as again was mentioned in the labor migration panel today, to think about the integration of those two sides of individuals already present in the workforce, and considering the inclusivity in the hiring, upskilling, and reskilling practices. In terms of what's missing, there were two elements that kind of really struck me as outstanding, and one is the role of migration and innovation. So ensuring that migration red tape does not stifle innovation. So we heard very briefly that a mention of the Draghi and the Letta report. And we saw also in the data maps today the restrictive practices that still occur in Europe in terms of trying to get talent into the European Union. And we heard, of course, the qualm and the complaint that was raised by the Kyrgyzstan delegation member in terms of processing times, and it's a complaint that we share also. Another element would be the green transition. There was no mention of the green transition over the last day and a half. I'd just come back from a Dutch delegation mission to Brazil, looking at hydrogen projects, and one of the main topics of conversation was green skills. What are green skills? How do we ensure that we provide for them in the future? And these green skills will impact industries across the spectrum and also across skill levels. So right now we talk about highly skilled, we talk about low, medium skilled, but the migration pathways that we have in labor migration are more fit for purpose for highly skilled and mostly in brown industries. Mindful of time, perhaps a little call to action, and maybe borrowing from the most used word of the day, the Gesamtkunstwerk, which you'll have to forgive my German pronunciation. My German skills stayed firmly in high school. We need to have this EU regional approach. This is what businesses want. This is how businesses look to Europe, whether they are already within Europe or sending foreign workers to Europe. They look to us as a bloc. And right now it is kind of being chipped away with our single market, with the reintroduction of temporary border controls in Schengen. And it's something that we need to ensure continues to be one of our competitive factors. Also, from a regional approach, we need to look at our skills-based hiring, as was mentioned today, looking at some of the inroads made by the EU Blue Card, looking at professional experience over educational qualifications, and Germany also has now the Opportunity Card, which makes some inroads there too. We need to look at digitalization. I mentioned our restrictive practices map. If you saw our online digitalization map of Europe, you'd be even more shocked of where we are. But there is progress being made. And finally, a correct implementation of the EU directives that we already have, adjacently to thinking about new pathways. There's still a lot of discrepancy and fragmentation, which can strike at the core of what we consider to be the EU bloc.
Thank you so much, Anna, Sofia, for this perspective from the private sector. I think that also, when we've talked security so much, it's such an important insight to have also and to hear that we should get better at forecasting, that we should not forget that there's innovation potential in migration, that green skills is a key element to look at, and also for the reinterpretation of the Gesamtkunstwerk. With that, last but again certainly not least, I'd like to move to you, Hanne, and maybe to help us also look at the bigger picture. I mean, you do so much relevant policy research on migration, and to really hear from you also what your main takeaways are and what you think we should be looking at in the next 5 years, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the conference organizers for bringing us all together. I think many have extended that appreciation for bringing the community together, also for inviting me and for asking me to pin down a moving target in the last session. Ivan Krashtov, if I pronounce that correctly, has really kicked off the conversation in a very splendid manner. What he did is really put the spotlight on the dilemmas that face the migration field, that define it, that refine it, and many speakers in the course of the proceedings have added to that. Let me just look to some of them. There was, of course, the dilemma of too many and too few. Ivan also referred to that, to the fact that on the one hand there's these vast and drastic changes that are affecting our demographies, that are shaping our societies, but he also offered some really acute insights in how that is reforming geopolitics as we know it. There's the dilemma of keeping out and letting in. Keeping out our concern, and rightful concern, on border management, on preventing irregular crossings. And at the same time, those vast and drastic demographic changes, of course, affecting the way our societies are led. This morning, we had a really good overview of the kinds of labor shortages that are facing across Europe, thinking about vital components such as health, education, mobility, energy. There's, of course, the tension at the one hand on human mobility as an engine of change and innovation, as a contribution to our global prosperity. And at the same time, that same human mobility being seen or sometimes really experienced as threatening or dissolving the social cohesion, the glue of our societies. there was also the dilemma of those that really underpinned many of the conversations we had in the past day, which is the dilemma of the one hand, those who belong and those who do not belong. It's in our human nature to define an in and out group, to want to feel safe and belong, and at the same time fend against a common enemy. But I think Ivan also really showed how that in and out group changes over the course of history. He told us of, for example, Poland and the perceived ethnic homogeneity of that society. I learned how the Irish became white. But we also learned how, for example, digital technology, but also algorithms, can actually reconfigure or help us rethink what it means to have a match between a migrant and a receiving community. It may allow us, through large databases, evidence, analysis, to really, in a more evidence-based manner, in a more kind of maybe neutral manner, think about how these kind of matches can support us in the years to come when we think about relocation, resettlement, but also how algorithms and AI and evidence base can also help us to rethink where skills lie in addressing those labor shortages. We've heard about, and of course, what we've confronted with as well is that kind of innovation, that constant search of innovation that satisfies our human interest in change, in new, shiny, bright things. I mean, I think we've captured a lot of those kind of new innovations, and I think we're all appreciative of that. And at the same time, it does shake up the familiar. It does reconfigure the rules of the game. And all of us are confronted with the persistent call for migration policies and strategies that save our democratic societies, democracy that is so dear to all of us. And at the same time, sometimes we're confronted with proposals that give us a kind of uncomfortable sensation that those very proposals are sometimes undermining or carving away at the pillars of these democracies. Think of, for example, checks and balances that are so crucial. So it's in our nature maybe to try and avoid or steer away of those kind of dilemmas, to try and seek to resolve them. But I think what a conference like this shows, and if we have very frank discussions, it shows that we really inhabit those kind of contradictions. We constantly navigate these dilemmas. That's what we do in the migration field, day in, day out. The question is more, how can we support leaders? How can we support actors of change in really to inhabit those contradictions, to embody them, that in-between space, and to make sure that they're enabled to take bold decisions amid and in full view of those kinds of tensions and dilemmas. And from MPI's side, things that are really crucial are spaces where we can have, as here, frank discussions, where we can make sure that we trust our counterparts, our discussion partners, that we know that they will be willing to look and review everything that's on the table, to make sure that we have data and an evidence base. I think a lot of topics that were discussed today and yesterday still really suffer from a lack of evidence, a really strong analysis. And last but not least, I think we need different partners to come to the table. We need, as we saw with Ivan, historians, demographers, macroeconomists that tell us about the future of work. So I think for next year's conference, we need instead of VMC, we'll need VMDEH, whatever. Another thing that I wanted to say is, in trying to summarize what we've done and what we've discussed in the past day and a half, I do still feel that we sometimes really lack the words, the concept, the theoretical frameworks, the language to really capture, analyze what we've been doing, how the field is moving ahead, but also what are some of the crucial gaps that we still face. I mean, I think for me, one of the key things, for example, is the notion of partnerships. And that really goes to the heart and to the core also of what ICMP does. It plays a crucial role in fostering partnerships. And at the same time, I was thinking about it when I came here many years ago. Partnership was something that we discussed as well in many of the panels. But does the label really fit what's in the tin? And do we really have a possibility to use it to analyze why it is that a partnership sometimes leads or allows for circular migration when we're thinking about addressing labor shortages? Why certain partnerships allows us to effectively return people? Why a partnership allows us to set up something like safe mobility offices? I think it's really crucial that we try and get to a better grips of what it means. I think in the past 7 to 9 years, that idea of partnerships has drastically evolved in European space. I think it's fair to say that in 2015, 2016, when the crisis hit us, the external dimension and those kind of partnerships were very limited, sometimes non-existent. And I think we've seen over the past years a kind of snake-like shedding of skin and a transformation of migration partnerships from something that was mainly focused on, for example, only preventing irregular migration or a concern with readmission, to ones that really capture or seek to capture also the voice of third countries, that really recognize the value of making sure that we recognize what remittances, what diaspora, what legal migration means in terms of nation and economy building in those very third countries, and how that helps us in developing more sustainable partnerships. I think it's really also important, I'll finish here. I think what I've also wanted to say is that really, I think the operational counterparts of those partnerships have also been discussed here at this gathering. And I think it's been really interesting to learn about national coordination mechanisms, also, for example, in relation to return, but also the kind of migration centers and how these evolve from places that, for example, reintegrate those who return to ones that actually facilitate legal migration and support through training regional migration, from ones that have and provide information to migrants to ones that actually are seeking to really, on the one hand, deal with very tough issues at the border, and at the same time also capture and offer different kind of legal pathways. And I'll end it here.
Thank you so much. Thank you really for making the case for dilemmas, actually, and that we need friends and partners to help navigate those dilemmas, and also for highlighting that maybe sometimes we have to look at the past for really making the case for the future, and maybe there's something to learn from what we've experienced in the previous years or decades. Thank you so much to all of you for joining me for this closing session. It was a true pleasure. I think most of us have an idea of what your personal highlights are from this conference, but I think now we have your expert insights that we can continue reflecting on also beyond this conference. So thank you so much once more. And this is really the perfect segue to the formal closing of this year's Vienna Migration Conference. And it's my true honor to welcome the Director General of ICMPD, Michael Spindelegger, to the stage. Please, Michael.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you to all the panelists. I don't have to say anything because you have summarized perfectly. Thanks a lot for that. Ladies and gentlemen, as every year, I'm closing the agenda, and I would like, of course, to thank you all for participating. It was, again, a wonderful event to discuss main highlights. And if I look about the framework we are in at the moment, I thought in the beginning of the conference a little bit, this will be a very pessimistic outlook because of all the heated debates we had during this year, with all the elections happening in Europe and the elections coming in the United States. So, of course, This was a fear from my side, but if I look to all the contributions that we have heard, they were realistic, they were also in some cases optimistic, and I think what we all can trust in is there are important tools in place, that the story is a real positive one in the future. And this is also, from my point of view, something that I take away from this conference, because we had many years where we have been discussing many different issues that will not be solved in the next time. So just let me conclude in some points from my point of view with main conclusions from this conference. First, we have been discussing for years the pact. And I remember quite well, also in this conference, we mentioned this will never happen. Now it is decided. Now, of course, it is in the implementation phase. And even if there are some rumors that some are not totally satisfied with that, most of the member states of the European Union are going to implement this rapidly. And we have heard in the last week, some of them would like to implement it more fast than it is foreseen. So I think these are really very good and optimistic expectations for the next years to come, that we have a pact, that European Union is also capable to talk with one voice, especially to all the other states that are dealing with migration. Secondly, about partnerships, we have heard it also now. I think what we have expected in Vienna migration conferences in the past is now happening. So many different agreements that have been concluded from the European Union, also from different member states, with the countries of origin, with transit countries. We did not expect that this will really happen, and we have it in place. Now, of course, it has to be filled with life, and I think one of these impressive sessions that we had with the Special Ambassador of Egypt is a good example for that. Egypt is now in a partnership with the European Union. There is an agreement in place. Many countries, also member countries of ICMPD, are interested to go further and to look forward what we can do. Third one is about international protection. I think the so-called route-based approach provides, of course, a broad set of measures for people in need in countries of origin. But also here we have heard from the representative of UNHCR and also what has been done by the World Bank to mobilize in the past 6 billion euros to help people in the countries of origin. This is also something that we have to talk about, because it's a very positive signal that something is happening and that we can look forward that we will top it in the future. And the last issue I would like to mention is, of course, we are talking about these many years, all the issues concerning labor migration. We have heard from Bangladesh and from Pakistan in the morning their expectations. And we see now, also as ICMPD, implementing projects in the labor migration issues, that this is really the big issue for the future. You will see, whenever we are coming up with increasing economy in Europe, I think it will happen next year, this will be the first topic, because all the enterprises will need people working for them. And they will be in need, of course, to have a good partnership with the countries of origin, to pick up the people, to have the right skills in place, and to have enough workers to put economy on top of the priorities. So I think also this is a very positive perspective, and we have to be ready and we have to be prepared to let it happen. And for that, we will work a lot as ICMPD with our different tools that we have, especially the migration facility issues, to help the countries and to support the countries together with European Union members. There have been so many excellent contributions to the debate. ranging from also external processing of asylum claims to the important question of our preparedness to deal with unexpected events and the link between new technology and migration. I could continue, but I think this is not the right moment for it. I want to assure you that none of the contributions made in this conference will be lost. Like every year, we will come up with a next edition of the VMC 2024, where we compile all these different debates in a conference report and share the report with you. What we have to talk about is, and this is my last point, we have to thank very much our partners. Without them, we could not organize a conference like this. I would like to name Organization for Refugee Services, ORS, Fragomen, and the City of Vienna. Once more, I would like to express my gratitude to all the panelists, the presenters, the discussants, for sharing their ideas and insights with us. And allow me also to have some words about our team preparing this. We are preparing all over the year with so many people, inviting people, organizing that they can travel, that we really have a good program at the VMC. And of course, with some tears in my eyes, I have to say goodbye to my Deputy Director General, Lukas Gerke. He has prepared for 9 years always this conference. Now he's leaving. Of course, life is ongoing. He thinks he has to make some adventures in future. Good luck for that, Lukas, and many thanks for all what you have done for the VMC. Thank you very much. But I can assure you, our great moderator of the conference will stay, Marlene Frankenhäuser, and I thank you very much for being so well always the time, so positive and engaging so much in this conference. Thank you, Marlene, and the whole team that prepared the conference of VMC this year. Thank you very much. On this note, I want to end. I wish you a good and safe travel home. If you are staying in Vienna, enjoy the city. Weather is not perfect, but you will see there are many things you can explore in Vienna, and hopefully to see you next year at the Vienna Migration Conference 2025. Thank you very much. This session is closed.